The morning sky was still dark when the black car started its journey through the empty streets of London. William sat in the back seat looking out at the familiar buildings that seemed different today. Everything looked the same but felt completely changed. His hands were resting on his knees, but they would not stop shaking no matter how hard he tried to keep them still. Catherine sat beside him wearing a simple black dress that she had chosen carefully that morning. She had stood in front of her closet for a long time trying to decide what was right for such a day. Nothing felt right because this day itself did not feel right. She kept glancing at her husband from the corner of her eye, watching his face change as they drove past places that held memories for him. The driver had been working for the royal family for more than 20 years. He had driven William to school when he was just a little boy. He had driven him to his first official royal duties when he became a young man. He had driven him to his wedding day when he married Catherine. But today was different from all those other days. Today the driver kept looking in the mirror at William and feeling worried about what he saw there. William was trying to remember the last conversation he had had just 3 days ago. The words kept playing in his mind over and over again. There had been laughter during that phone call. There had been plans made for the following week. There had been a promise to visit soon. Now all those plans felt like they belonged to a different world entirely. The car moved slowly through the streets because there was no hurry anymore. They had all the time in the world, and yet no time at all. Catherine reached over and put her hand on William's arm. She did not say anything because she knew that words would not help right now. Sometimes the best thing to do was just to be there with someone without trying to fix everything. William remembered being 7 years old and running through the halls of the palace. He remembered being told to slow down and walk like a proper prince. But there had always been someone who would smile when he ran anyway. Someone who understood that being a little boy was just as important as being a prince. Someone who would pick him up when he fell down and dust off his knees before anyone else could see. The buildings outside the car windows started to look more familiar as they got closer to their destination. William recognized the shops and the trees and the way the road curved around the old church. His heart started beating faster because he knew they were almost there. He was not ready, but he also knew that nobody could ever be ready for something like this. Catherine squeezed his arm a little tighter and turned to look at him directly. Her eyes were full of love and strength, and William felt grateful that she was there with him. He did not know how people got through difficult times without someone to hold on to. He thought about all the people who had to face hard things completely alone and felt sad for them too. The driver slowed down even more as they approached the final turn. William could see other cars parked ahead, which meant that other family members had already arrived. He wondered if they were feeling the same mix of sadness and fear and love that was filling up his chest until it was hard to breathe properly. As they made the last turn, William saw the building where he had spent so many important days of his life. It looked exactly the same as it always had, but today it felt like they were arriving on a different planet. Everything was familiar and strange at the same time. The car came to a gentle stop, and William knew that the journey was over, but the hardest part was just beginning. The car door opened, and William stepped out onto the gravel driveway that crunched under his feet just like it had when he was a child. The sound brought back a flood of memories so strong that he had to stop walking for a moment. Catherine got out on her side and walked around to stand next to him. She could see that something was happening inside his mind, and she waited patiently for him to be ready to move forward. William looked up at the tall windows of the building in front of them. Behind the third window on the second floor was the room where he used to do his homework every afternoon after school. He remembered sitting at the old wooden desk, struggling with mathematics while someone sat nearby helping him understand the problems. There had been patience and encouragement, even when the numbers seemed impossible to figure out. The front garden looked exactly the same as it always had. The rose bushes were blooming with bright red flowers that filled the air with their sweet smell. William remembered being taught how to cut roses properly without getting hurt by the thorns. He remembered learning that beautiful things sometimes came with sharp edges, but that did not mean you should be afraid to enjoy them anyway. Catherine watched her husband's face change as different memories came back to him. She had heard many stories about this place over the years they had been together. She knew about the Christmas mornings when presents were opened by the fireplace. She knew about the birthday parties with homemade cakes and silly games. She knew about the quiet evenings when stories were read aloud until someone fell asleep in a comfortable chair. William started walking again toward the front door. Each step felt heavy because he knew that today would be the last time he walked up this path for this reason. After today, everything would be different. The door would still open and the rooms would still be there, but the most important thing about this place would be gone forever. The front door was painted blue just like it had always been. William remembered being tall enough to reach the door handle for the first time. He remembered the pride he felt when he was finally allowed to open the door by himself instead of waiting for someone taller to do it for him. Now he was much taller, but somehow he felt smaller than he had in many years. Catherine reached out and took his hand as they walked up the 3 steps to the door. Her hand felt warm and steady and real in a way that helped William remember that he was not alone in this moment. She had not known this place when she was young, but she understood what it meant to him. She understood that some places hold pieces of your heart even when you are far away from them. Before William could knock on the door, it opened from the inside. His brother Harry was standing there looking tired and sad, but also relieved to see them arrive. The 2 brothers looked at each other for a long moment without saying anything. They both knew why they were there, and they both knew that being together would make it a little bit easier to get through. Harry stepped aside to let William and Catherine come inside. The hallway smelled like the special soap that had always been used to clean the floors. The smell was so familiar that William felt like he was stepping back in time to when he was young, and the world seemed much simpler than it did now. As they walked deeper into the house, William could hear quiet voices coming from the main sitting room. Other family members had already gathered there waiting for this moment that none of them wanted to face, but all of them knew had to come. William walked slowly down the familiar hallway with Catherine's hand still holding his tightly. The walls were covered with photographs that he had looked at thousands of times before, but today they seemed to glow with special meaning. Every picture told a story of happiness and love and moments that could never happen again. His footsteps sounded loud on the wooden floor even though he was trying to walk quietly. Harry walked behind them without saying much because he knew that this was not a time for many words. Sometimes the most important conversations happened in silence when people just stayed close to each other. He could see that his brother was struggling to keep his emotions under control, and he remembered feeling the same way when he had first arrived an hour earlier. The sitting room door was half open and warm light was spilling out into the hallway. William could hear his aunt speaking in a soft voice to someone else. He could hear the sound of teacups touching saucers and the rustle of tissues being pulled from boxes. These were the sounds of family coming together during difficult times when normal life had to stop for a while. Catherine felt William's hand getting tighter around hers as they got closer to the door. She could feel his whole body getting tense, like he was preparing for something very hard. She wanted to tell him that everything would be okay, but she knew that would not be true. Some things were not okay, and would never be okay again, and sometimes the kindest thing was just to admit that. William stopped walking just before they reached the door. He could see into the room now, and he could see other family members sitting together on the comfortable old furniture. His grandmother was there in her favorite chair, looking smaller than usual, but still sitting very straight and proper. His father was standing by the window looking out at the garden, with his hands behind his back, the way he always did when he was thinking about serious things. The room felt full of love and sadness mixed together in a way that made the air seem thick and hard to breathe. Everyone was dressed in dark colors that made their faces look pale and tired. Some people were talking quietly to each other, while others just sat in silence holding cups of tea that had probably gone cold without them noticing. William knew that once he walked into that room, everything would become real in a way that it had not been real yet. Right now, he could still pretend that this was just a regular family visit. He could still imagine that in a little while everyone would start laughing about something silly and the sadness would go away. But once he went into that room, He would have to face the truth that had brought them all together. Catherine squeezed his hand 3 times, which was their secret signal that meant "I love you." She had started doing this on their wedding day when they were both nervous about walking down the aisle in front of so many people. Now she used it whenever one of them needed to remember that they were not alone no matter what was happening around them. William took a deep breath and straightened his shoulders. He looked at Catherine and then at Harry and saw love and support in both their faces. He realized that he did not have to be strong enough to handle this by himself. He had people who would help him carry the weight of this sadness until it became something he could manage on his own. With one more deep breath, William stepped forward into the room where his family was waiting for him. William stepped into the sitting room and immediately felt like he was being wrapped in a warm blanket of memories. The room smelled exactly the same as it always had, with a mixture of lavender and old books and the special polish that was used on the wooden furniture. Every smell brought back a different memory, and William felt like he was experiencing his whole childhood all at once. His grandmother looked up when she saw him enter, and her face showed relief mixed with deep sadness. She had been waiting for him to arrive, because she knew that this moment would be easier to face when the whole family was together. She held out her hand toward him, and William walked over to her chair and bent down to kiss her cheek, the way he had done since he was a small boy. Catherine followed behind William and was amazed by how many people had come to be here today. She recognized some faces from family gatherings and royal events, but there were others she had never met before. All of them looked at William with expressions of love and concern that made Catherine feel grateful that her husband had so many people who cared about him deeply. The walls of the room were covered with paintings and photographs that told the story of many generations of the same family. Catherine had looked at these pictures before during happier visits, but today they seemed to glow with special importance. She could see William's face in some of the older photographs when he was just a young boy with messy hair and a big smile that showed his missing front teeth. William's father came over from the window where he had been standing and put his hand on his son's shoulder. They looked at each other for a moment, and William could see his own sadness reflected in his father's eyes. Neither of them said anything, but they both understood that they were sharing something that would change them both forever. Harry found a chair near the fireplace and sat down heavily, like he was carrying something very heavy on his shoulders. He had been trying to be strong for everyone else, but now that William was here, he felt like he could finally let some of his own sadness show. The two brothers caught each other's eyes across the room and shared the kind of look that only people who grew up together could understand. Catherine noticed that there were fresh flowers everywhere in the room. Someone had taken great care to fill every vase with beautiful blooms that brought color and life into a day that felt dark and sad. She wondered if this was something that always happened when families gathered like this, or if someone had done it especially to make today a little bit brighter. The afternoon sun was streaming through the tall windows and creating patterns of light and shadow on the carpet. William remembered lying on this same carpet as a child, reading books and playing with toy soldiers, while adults talked about grown-up things around him. Back then, the conversations had seemed boring and unimportant, but now he wished he could go back to those simple days when his biggest worry was finishing his homework before dinner. Several family members came over to hug William and Catherine and to whisper words of comfort and support. Each hug felt like it was giving William a little bit of strength that he knew he would need for what was coming next. He realized that even though this day was about loss, it was also about love and about how families hold each other up during the hardest times of their lives. After spending time greeting family members, William knew that he could not put off the real reason he had come here any longer. He could feel his heart beating faster as he walked toward the center of the room, where fresh white flowers had been arranged in a beautiful display. Each step felt harder than the last, and he had to concentrate on just breathing normally so that he would not feel dizzy or sick. Catherine stayed right beside him, feeling his nervousness and fear like it was her own. She had never experienced anything like this in her own family, and she was trying to understand what William needed from her right now. Sometimes being a good wife meant knowing when to talk and when to stay quiet, and when to just be present without trying to fix everything. The flowers were arranged around several framed photographs that showed different stages of a long and well-lived life. William recognized every single picture because they were images of moments he had lived through himself. There was a picture from a Christmas morning when he was about 10 years old, sitting next to the Christmas tree opening presents with a huge smile on his face. There was another photograph from his wedding day showing all three of them together looking happy and proud. William remembered that day so clearly because it had been one of the best days of his entire life. Everyone he loved most in the world had been there celebrating with him and Catherine as they promised to love each other forever, no matter what happened. Other family members stepped back quietly to give William the space and privacy he needed for this moment. They understood that some things had to be experienced alone, even when you were surrounded by people who loved you. The room became very quiet except for the sound of people breathing softly and the tick of the old clock on the mantelpiece that had been keeping time in this room for more than 50 years. William looked at each photograph carefully, trying to memorize every detail. He wanted to remember not just how these moments looked, but how they felt when they were happening. He remembered the sound of laughter and the feeling of being completely happy and safe and loved. Those feelings seemed very far away right now, but he knew they were still real and still part of who he was. The reality of why he was standing there started to sink in deeper, and William felt his carefully controlled emotions beginning to crack like ice on a warm day. He had been trained since childhood to keep his feelings private and to always appear strong and in control, no matter what was happening in his personal life. But today that training felt impossible to follow. Catherine noticed the change in William's breathing and moved closer to him. She put her arm around his waist and felt him lean into her strength. She whispered very quietly that it was okay to feel everything he was feeling and that she would stay right there with him, no matter what happened next. Her words were like a permission he had been waiting for without knowing it. William's hands started to shake, and he felt tears beginning to gather in his eyes, even though he was trying hard to stop them. He looked around the room at all the people who had come to be here today and realized that they were all feeling the same mixture of love and loss that was filling up his chest until it was hard to breathe properly. The moment he had been dreading and needing at the same time was finally here, and William knew that there was no way to get through it except to let himself feel everything that was happening inside his heart. The tears that William had been trying so hard to hold back finally began to fall down his cheeks, and once they started, he could not make them stop. All the years of royal training about keeping emotions private and appearing strong in public seemed to disappear completely. In this moment, he was not a prince or a future king. He was simply a person who was losing someone he loved more than words could ever explain. His shoulders began to shake, and he felt like he might fall down if Catherine was not there holding him up. She wrapped both her arms around him and let him lean his full weight against her while he cried. She did not try to tell him to stop or to be strong or to think about who might be watching. She just held him and let him feel everything he needed to feel. Harry saw what was happening and walked over to stand on William's other side. He put his hand on his brother's shoulder and felt his own tears starting to fall too. For a moment, all the distance and disagreements that had come between them over the years seemed to disappear completely. They were just two brothers who had shared the same loss and who understood each other's pain in a way that nobody else could. Other family members in the room began crying too as they watched William's grief and remembered their own feelings about why they were all gathered there. The room filled with the sound of quiet sobbing and gentle whispers of comfort. Nobody tried to make the crying stop because everyone understood that tears were the only honest response to what they were all experiencing. William tried several times to speak, but the words would not come out properly. Every time he opened his mouth to say something important, his voice would break and more tears would fall. Catherine rubbed his back in slow circles, the way she did when he had trouble sleeping after difficult days. The simple gesture reminded him that he was not alone in his sadness. His grandmother watched from her chair with tears streaming down her own face. She had lived through many losses in her long life, but that did not make this one any easier to bear. She knew that William was experiencing something that would change him forever, and that he would carry this sadness with him for the rest of his life, even as he learned to live with it. The afternoon light coming through the windows seemed softer now, as if even the sun understood that this was not a day for brightness. The shadows in the room grew longer, and the whole space felt like it was holding everyone gently while they went through this difficult time together. Even the air seemed different, like it was full of love and support. William finally managed to take a few deeper breaths and wipe his eyes with the tissue that Catherine handed him. He looked around the room at all the faces of people who loved him and felt grateful that he did not have to go through this experience by himself. He realized that being vulnerable in front of family was not the same as being weak, and that letting people help him carry his sadness was actually a sign of wisdom. Harry squeezed his shoulder and whispered that he was proud of his brother for letting himself feel everything instead of trying to pretend that he was okay. William nodded and took another shaky breath, knowing that the hardest part was not over yet, but feeling a little bit stronger because of all the love that was surrounding him in that room. After the tears had slowed down, William found that he wanted to talk about the memories that were filling his mind. His voice was still shaky and quiet, but the words started coming easier once he began. He talked about lessons he had learned and advice he had been given that had helped shape the person he had become. Each memory seemed to bring a little bit of comfort along with the sadness. He told everyone about the time when he was 8 years old and had broken his grandmother's favorite vase while playing football in the house. Instead of getting angry, there had been gentle teaching about being more careful and taking responsibility for mistakes. The lesson had stayed with him his whole life and had made him a better person and a better leader. Catherine listened to every word and added her own memories about the kindness and wisdom she had experienced during family visits. She talked about feeling welcomed and accepted from the very first time she had been invited to join family gatherings. She remembered feeling nervous about fitting in, but being treated with such warmth that her worries had melted away quickly. Harry shared a story about getting lost in the woods during a family vacation when he was very young. Instead of panic, there had been calm organization and gentle reassurance. He had been found quickly and comforted without being made to feel foolish for wandering off. The memory made him smile even through his tears because it showed how much care and love had always surrounded them. William's father talked about receiving advice about marriage and parenthood that had helped him navigate some of the most important decisions of his life. The guidance had always been given with humor and understanding, and without judgment about the mistakes that everyone makes while learning how to be a good husband and father. As more family members began sharing their own memories, the room gradually filled with stories of kindness and humor and dedication to helping others. Each story seemed to add another layer of comfort to the sadness that everyone was feeling. The memories were proof that even though this day was about saying goodbye, it was also about celebrating a life that had touched many people in meaningful ways. William's grandmother shared some of her favorite memories from when William and Harry were small children. She talked about teaching them to bake cookies in the kitchen and how they always made more mess than cookies, but how much fun they had together. She remembered reading bedtime stories and answering endless questions about everything from why the sky was blue to how airplanes stayed up in the air. The stories brought laughter mixed with tears as people remembered funny moments and silly mistakes and times when everything had gone wrong, but had somehow turned out right anyway. William felt surprised that he could laugh and cry at the same time, but it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Joy and sadness seemed to be able to exist together in the same heart at the same time. Catherine noticed how the tension in William's shoulders was beginning to ease as he listened to all these stories about love and family and the importance of staying connected to the people who matter most. She could see that sharing memories was helping everyone in the room process their grief in a healthy way. As the afternoon went on, the stories became a way of honoring everything good about the life they were all there to remember. Instead of focusing only on the sadness of loss, they were choosing to celebrate all the love and wisdom and joy that would continue to live on in their own hearts and lives. As the hours passed, something beautiful and unexpected began to happen in that room full of grieving family members. While the sadness remained strong and real, it started to mix with other feelings that brought comfort and even moments of peace. The shared memories had created a bridge between the pain of loss and the gratitude for all the love that had been given and received over many years. William found himself smiling through his tears when his aunt told a story about a family picnic where everything had gone wrong. The sandwiches had been forgotten, the weather had turned rainy, and they had all ended up crowded under a small shelter eating cookies for lunch. But instead of the day being ruined, it had become one of their most treasured family memories because they had laughed together and made the best of an imperfect situation. Catherine watched William's face change as he listened to story after story about resilience and humor and the ability to find joy even during difficult times. She could see that these stories were giving him examples of how to carry forward the best parts of what he was losing. The sadness would always be there, but it did not have to be the only thing he remembered. Harry told everyone about the time he had been nervous about giving his first public speech and had received coaching that was both practical and encouraging. The advice had not just been about how to speak in public, but about how to find confidence by remembering that everyone makes mistakes and that the most important thing was to speak from the heart about things that really mattered. The room gradually filled with gentle laughter as people shared stories about cooking disasters and gardening failures in times when formal events had not gone according to plan. Each story showed that perfectionism was not as important as kindness, and that being able to laugh at mistakes was a valuable skill that made life more enjoyable for everyone. William realized that he was learning something important about grief by watching how his family was handling this difficult day together. Instead of trying to avoid the sadness or pretend it was not there, they were letting it exist alongside love and gratitude and even humor. The different emotions did not cancel each other out, but somehow made each other stronger and more meaningful. His grandmother looked around the room at all the faces of people she loved and felt proud of how they were supporting each other. She had seen many families torn apart by grief and conflict, but this family was choosing to come together and hold each other up during their darkest moment. She knew that this togetherness would help everyone heal in the months and years ahead. The afternoon sun began to slant through the windows in a different way, casting warm golden light across the room. The light seemed to highlight the faces of everyone there, and William felt like he was seeing his family more clearly than he had in a long time. He could see the strength and love that connected all of them, even when they disagreed about other things. Catherine squeezed his hand and smiled at him with eyes that were still wet with tears, but also full of hope. She could see that something had shifted in William during these hours they had spent together, sharing memories and supporting each other. The grief was still there, but it was no longer the only thing filling up his heart. William looked around the room one more time and felt overwhelming gratitude for being part of a family that knew how to love each other through the hardest times. He realized that while he was losing someone incredibly important, he was also surrounded by other people who would continue to love and support him through whatever challenges lay ahead. As the day began to wind down and the golden afternoon light started to fade, William stood once more in the quiet center of the room, surrounded by the photographs and flowers. This time his tears were gentler and mixed with a sense of peace that he had not expected to find on such a difficult day. The crushing weight of grief was still there, but it no longer felt like something that would destroy him completely. He made a quiet promise to himself and to everyone in the room that he would carry forward all the lessons he had learned about kindness and service and putting family first, even when life got complicated. He promised to love his own wife and children the way he had been loved, with patience and understanding, and the kind of support that helped people become their best selves. Catherine stood beside him, feeling proud of her husband for allowing himself to be vulnerable and for letting his family help him through this painful experience. She made her own silent promise to help him remember not just the sadness of this day, but also the love and togetherness that had surrounded them when they needed it most. She knew that grief would be a long journey, but they would travel it together. Harry came over and put his arm around his brother's shoulder one more time. The two brothers looked at each other and both understood that something important had changed between them today. The petty disagreements and hurt feelings that had created distance between them seemed small and unimportant compared to the love they shared as family. They'd promised each other to do better at staying connected in the future. William's grandmother watched her grandsons with satisfaction, knowing that they had learned something valuable about the importance of family unity during difficult times. She had worried that grief might drive them apart the way it sometimes did with other families, but instead she could see that it had brought them closer together and reminded them of what really mattered in life. As people began to prepare to leave, William took one last long look around the room, trying to memorize every detail. He wanted to remember not just the photographs and flowers, but also the faces of everyone who had come to support him today. He wanted to remember the sound of shared laughter through tears and the feeling of being held up by people who loved him unconditionally. The room that had felt so heavy with sadness when he first arrived now felt lighter somehow. The grief was still there and would probably always be there in some form, but it was no longer the only thing in the room. Love and hope and determination to honor good memories had found space to exist alongside the sadness. William and Catherine walked slowly toward the door, knowing that when they left this room they would be beginning a new chapter of their lives. The chapter would be marked by loss, but also by a deeper understanding of what family really meant and how people could help each other survive even the most difficult experiences. As they reached the doorway, William turned back one more time to look at the room where he had spent some of the most important hours of his life. He felt grateful for the time they had all shared together and for the love that had surrounded him when he needed it most. He knew he would return to this place many times in his memory, and that each time he would remember not just the sadness, but also the strength and support that had helped him get through. Walking out into the evening air, William felt different than he had when he arrived that morning. The grief was still there, but it was accompanied by something else now. He felt a deep appreciation for the love he had received and a determination to make sure that the rest of his life would be worthy of all the care and wisdom that had been given to him over the years.